Merlin, new hat.
Yeah. Thank you, Mom.
I like it.
Mom sent me this Merlin hat. Everybody knows you nicknamed me Merlin, but Mom, for my birthday, sent me
it's catching on.
The Merlin hat.
Branding. All right, what do we got on the Be Built by Broser today?
Okay, so what we want to talk about today, this is an exercise that you and I did the other day, and you said, hey, this would be a really good one to show, and I agree. This is a low cable preacher curl. So basically, we're setting up an incline bench by a low cable, grabbing a single cable handle. And the thing that's really good about this movement is a few things. First of all, obviously when you're using a cable, you have constant tension. So there's constant tension from the beginning of the movement all the way to the end, especially that peak contraction, which is something you don't get with a dumbbell. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that with an incline bench, here at a cable, we can vary the incline. So we can go for a more steep incline or less steep incline, which will give you a little bit different, the range of motion will feel a little different. The pressure will feel a little bit more or less towards the beginning or the end of the movement. So it's another great thing that we can vary. The next thing we can vary is body position. So when I have you demonstrate the movement, I'm going to have you demonstrate it with two different body positionings. One where the body is angled off to the side this way, and one where the body is more straight on. So we can work the inner head of the bicep versus the outer head of the bicep. Again, we never isolate the bicep and head of the bicep completely. Everything's contracting, but we can target muscle fibers in the inner or outer head depending on which way we face our body. So this is a great movement for mass, shape building. You can do it heavy, light, it feels great all different ways. You want to do it strictly, and obviously you'll see that the cadence that you will use during the movement will be slow negatives, about 3 to 4 seconds, holding 1 second at the bottom, squeezing to the top in about 1 second, and holding the top position for about 1 second. But again, on some workouts you can hold it for longer, depending on, but that's a cadence we're going to use today. Great movement for biceps. Okay, so here is the setup that I talked about. Here's the incline bench, the low pulley, and the way we have his body set right here, he's working the inner head of the bicep a little bit more strongly, because the way his body is turned, he's curling and he's supinating all the way to the top, and he's turning that wrist in and getting that squeeze. So I'm going to actually show you right here the inner portion of the bicep, and Dave is cut enough so you can see that. That's what we're working more strongly. Of course, the whole bicep is contracting, but we're just concentrating on those fibers. Now I'm going to have him switch to a position where he's going to work a little bit more of the outer head of the bicep. So he's going to change his body position. So now he's going to be curling at a slightly different angle. He's not turning the wrist out as much. He's actually curling more in toward the anterior deltoid. And what this is doing as he curls, as he's now putting a little bit more focus onto that outer portion of the bicep and a little bit more into the brachialis, which is here, and the outer head here. So again, he's using the same cadence, about 3 seconds down, 1 second at the bottom, 1 second up, and a 1 second squeeze. And this movement is excellent for getting that peak contraction at the top. And again, changing the body position will just change the focus of what portion of the bicep we work on. Give these a shot.
Hi Merlin, this is the Ask Merlin part of the show, and I got a question for you, Merlin. it's gonna be my question. So, we're well into the off season right now. There's no show for, at least not for me. And you have a few athletes, of course, doing the Ferrigno, including Lionel and Jason and Mark and all these guys, which is great. So you'll be busy. But my question was, a lot of time as people prepping for shows, and we've seen some close friends here at Goals that do this, and I'm always kind of puzzled with that. Even though they seem in good shape and they seem like they're making progress and stuff, we hear sometimes that people will go like ridiculously low carb, for days sometimes. Like we're talking like 0 grams of carbs. And I know sometimes you've used that method before, but for people who had a lot of weight to lose, because they're behind or they really have to shed a lot of body fat, and of course you'll increase their fats and their protein, to compensate. But why do you think that if someone who's in fairly good shape and let's say, on target to do a show, why do you think people have them do, certain coaches, like 0 grams of carb for days on end. I mean, I'm talking something ridiculous, like 2-3 weeks at a time, and then of course they go super high carb. What's the idea behind that, and do you agree with that?
Well, I can't speak for the coaches that do it because obviously they have their reasons, and I would suspect that they think that that's the right thing to do for the client, and think that, you know, some type of you know, dropping of the carbs to that point will, you know, bring a leap forward in loss of body fat.
What do you think about it?
But I don't personally agree with it, because I think that, you know, while dropping carbs to like 0 and forcing the body, you know, the goal is to force the body to use fat stores for energy, and that makes sense. But you also have to look at a couple of things. You have to look at, number one, what is that going to do to the metabolism? So if you do that for too long, you are going to slow down the metabolism. The thyroid is going to take a hit, and it's going to slow down as well, and that's going to make continual body fat a problem. The second thing you have to watch out for is that, you know, we're talking about bodybuilders, we're talking about physique athletes, we're talking about figure girls, we're talking about people who need to come on stage not just with low body fat, but with as much muscle mass as possible. We're not talking about the general public who just wants to see the scale go down, and a lot of times a 0 carb diet will work very well for those people because they need to lose a lot of weight. They're not that worried about muscle mass or body fat percentage per se, but they want to see the scale go down. But we have to maximize muscle mass, and I think that when you go too low in carbohydrates or 0 carbs like you're talking about, you're going to start eating into muscle mass, because, you know, carbohydrates have a function in the body, obviously for energy. They help to spare proteins, which are for muscle mass. Plus also, you know, carbohydrates helps your body release insulin, and insulin is the most anabolic hormone in the body. So you do need to have carbohydrates in order to build muscle mass, or at least maintain muscle mass during a diet. So I think the mistake happens, and I think you see this with a lot of guys who do this. You can kind of tell on stage somebody who's dieted on too low of carbs, because their body fat is low and you can see it, but at the same time they look flat. The muscles aren't pushing out against the skin, and a lot of coaches sometimes say, well, don't worry about it, we'll take care of that a few days before the show, we'll load you with carbs. But that usually doesn't work, because, you know, after weeks and weeks and weeks of doing this for like a whole prep, you know, 2 weeks of very low carbs and then a week high carb, the body eventually gets too tired, it gets too run down, and you can't recover so quickly before a show. So I think the biggest problem is that, you know, there's nothing wrong with cycling carbs, which I like to do. There's nothing wrong with going lower carbs. There's nothing even wrong with going 0 carbs sometimes if you think that's needed in the protocol to get somebody who maybe didn't start off in great shape to move them along a little bit faster. But you don't want to keep somebody in that state for too long, in my opinion, because of the loss of muscle mass mostly, and because it'll slow down the metabolism and then make body fat loss difficult in the future. And then also, you also want to worry about it if you're worrying about an athlete and their entire, you know, future in the sport. You're not just thinking about this show, you're thinking about the next show, you're thinking about the year after. You also don't want to put them in a situation where the body's always rebounding, because if you take carbohydrates out of the diet for too long and then the body is not used to them, and then you introduce them back in incorrectly, you're going to rebound so hard and the body's going to hold a tremendous amount of water. You know, you're going to put on a lot of body fat, and then you put yourself in a position of going, you know, taking 2 or 3 steps backwards, and then you hurt yourself. So I think it's better to balance things out so that there's no extremes one way or the other, which is why even when we talk about the final week of prep, I don't like to do anything extreme over and above what we've been doing the entire prep, because I don't want the body to have to deal with something that it's not used to dealing with. So nice. To me, that's the problem. And I have, you know, I can't say anything about other coaches who use this method. If it's working for them, working for their clients, and they're happy, they're happy. But you asking me as a coach, I've never believed in that method, because I think that it will backfire in the end. And I don't think it leaves the physique in an optimal place on stage day as far as muscle mass goes.
Nice. Thanks, Biggie.